Don't let the September blues get you down. Enhance your everyday with our terrific sponsor, Via Hemp.
Via Hemp is all about crafting award-winning THC and THC-free gummies.
We love this company because they grow their premium hemp right here on American farms. Their products come at such a great value, especially for Murder Sheet listeners 21 and older, who get 15% off their first order with our exclusive code MSHEET. Just go to viahemp.com, that's VIIAHEMP.com. When you support our sponsors, you're supporting us.
No matter what you're looking for, they've got something delicious and cool for you.
See, Via's gummies were each created to elicit a specific mood. Boost your pleasure, get some shut-eye, harness your creativity, experiment with microdosing. Whatever you want to do, Via has a THC or THC-free gummy for you.
And it's also accessible. No medical card is required. The gummies ship legally to all 50 states.
I love their grapefruit CBG and CBD flow state gummy because they help me really channel all my energy into getting productive and efficient.
Well, no matter what mood you're seeking, we strongly recommend Via.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSHEET to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSHEET at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Byte clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Byte clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte. What makes a life a good one? Is it the adventure you have? Or the friends you find along the way? Maybe it's pursuing your passion while striving to protect, defend, and save what you believe in every single day. So what makes a life a good one? In the Coast Guard, we think it's all of the above and more. But you'll have to find out for yourself. Visit gocoastguard.com to learn more.
Content warning. This episode includes discussion of the murder of 2 girls. It might also contain profanity because it is quite late and we are tired.
So today we attended the last and longest day of the 3 days of pre-trial hearings in the Delphi murders case. This is, of course, the murder case of surrounding Liberty German and Abigail Williams, 2 Delphi teenagers who were murdered in 2017. The man accused and charged with murdering them is named Richard Allen, and he is facing those charges, and he's heading towards trial in October, allegedly.
This hearing started at 9 a.m. and it lasted until 8:30 p.m., and we will tell you all about it in just a moment.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
Three days of pretrial hearings, day 3. So as you can probably hear already, we've actually been up since 4 a.m.
And we got 4 hours of sleep last night.
If we apologize if we sound kind of weird, it's we've been running around.
People are used to it.
Yeah, people are like, well, there's no difference for me.
That horse left the barn a long time ago.
The horse has left the country at this point. So yeah.
So the morning starts with taking care of a bit of old business from yesterday. Yesterday was devoted to whether or not the confessions. Richard Allen has made 61 at least confessions of his involvement in this crime of killing Abby and Libby. And the question is, are these going to be admitted or not? And so testimony on that issue ended yesterday. But they didn't get to the arguments yesterday. Attorneys, after they present their evidence, they get to offer an argument. It's like, well, would basically say, well, you've heard all the evidence. Now I'm going to tell you, Judge, why I'm right and why you should rule for me.
Yes.
And I don't know, there's so much to cover. I don't know.
Yeah, and let's just say we're going to go in chronological order because there's a lot to cover. But unlike yesterday where like all the really interesting stuff was toward the end, the interesting stuff is scattered throughout. So listen to the whole thing because there's going to be some big stuff at the end too.
But I'm saying, because there's so much, I don't know if we really want to go into a lot of detail on their arguments because I feel it's also basically what they said yesterday.
What they said yesterday.
But I will say, and this is something that I think I and Anya in particular would be also complaining about later. There was so much material to get through today, and I do not think the defense attorneys in particular were good stewards of their time. Brad Rosie made, like a half hour, 45-minute argument.
Which was incredibly repetitive.
And basically his argument was, well, Richard Allen is in such poor conditions at the prison that it means anything he says is the result of coercion somehow produced by these bad circumstances he's in, and so should be thrown out. And he said that for, as I say, about 45 minutes.
It felt longer, but it was about 45 minutes. And it was one of those things that I think if you boiled it down, it would actually be a lot more powerful and impactful for everyone. And it just... The defense today, this was something that was, I feel like, needlessly dragged on again and again, and I don't understand it unless they don't seem to know how to, like, stop talking and just let their points carry. And Brad Rosie, in fairness to him, he did, I think, a pretty good job yesterday. He started out today kind of not as, I don't know, he kind of didn't have that spark that he did yesterday, but in general, I feel like out of the three defense attorneys, including Jennifer Auger and Andrew Baldwin, he's been by far the strongest performance these 3 days. Now, in summary, in my own summation, these 3 days have been completely disastrous for this defense team. But out of the three, Rosie has carried the day again and again. That's just my opinion. So I feel like...
spoiler alert, today was another disaster for the defense.
Today was another disaster for the defense.
I do, before we leave this topic, I wrote down a couple of quotes from his argument. In reference to Dr. Walla, who, of course, heard some of the confessions of Richard Allen, he said, Dr. Walla was not acting as his psychologist. She was acting as a friend.
That was really bizarre. And can I just say, with Dr. Walla, we've talked about that, and I don't really feel comfortable necessarily weighing in on that situation too much until we really get a sense for some mental health professionals about what their ethical obligations are, what the impact of the case could be. Generally, I understand the concerns about her taking such a personal investment in Richard Allen's case, but at the same time, it really doesn't sound like there's any evidence that she did anything particularly egregious in terms of his case. And so, whatever. But where I'm going with this is that one thing that Rosie did a great job was building her up yesterday and tearing her down. At the first, she's like his friend who's taking care of him and was doing all these accommodations for him and can really speak to how hard of a time he was having and all his mental health struggles. Then the next minute, she's this true crime obsessed lady who's getting too invested and broke all the rules. And that was actually very effective from like a drama standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, if you need her to prove that he is having all these problems, maybe don't, go after her that hard.
Strategy.
Right? Or if you need to go after her that hard, don't build her up and lean on her for the other stuff.
And then the prosecution got a chance to offer their own argument, and this was done by Stacey Diener, and she was much more concise and on point, and I thought she did a fine job, again, making some of the arguments from yesterday.
Yeah, it's not coercive for Alan to be making unsolicited statements to those around him, including to Dr. Walla, who asked him to stop talking and said, basically, don't talk to people without your lawyer, including to his family who were telling him to shut up and hanging up on him. He is putting himself in these situations where he is desperate to make these confessions. It is not anyone trying to press him into anything.
She said he was motivated by religion and not coercion, and mentioned that he wanted to give Bibles to people.
Oh, that made me really uncomfortable. I'm not going to lie. I'll say that. I don't mind saying that is a feeling that I had when we were listening to that. He talked about how he wants to give Bibles away to people who need them, including he wanted to send his Bible to the families of his alleged victims.
So yeah, that was an interesting.
That was disturbing.
Point.
That was really disturbing.
And she repeated that the confessions that were made by Richard Allen include details that would be only known by a person who was there at the crime as it's happening. And that's the gold standard for a confession. If a confession includes details that only the killer would know, that makes it obviously far more credible. A person having a psychotic break and suddenly going around making dozens of false confessions, he's not going to be able to make confessions that have details only the killer would know.
And let's just clear something up, because I think this is really important. And I think it's important for people to go with the facts and not just like some garbled version of what they're hearing. And we were on, court TV tonight, and I felt like people didn't seem to understand this, but it's been repeated ad nauseum that Alan has made false confessions because he said things like, oh, the girls were shot in the head, or I molested them before they were killed. And what people say correctly is that the crime scene does not indicate either of those things happened. So those must be false. And if that was something that we knew him to have actually said, then that would be a very salient point. But what came out on testimony yesterday with Detective Brian Harshman was that we're looking at not just audio and video recordings, we're looking at written testimonials in the form of log sheets or door sheets or whatever you want to call them, that his prison inmate companions who are basically watching him on suicide watch are making. And there is very much what seems to be the strong potential for a telephone game where he says something, one of the companions writes it down, they tell someone else, and then suddenly he shot them instead of stabbed them. That seems very likely to me, and I think that was borne out by some of the things Detective Harshman said. So that's another thing where the defense is writing this check where it's like, yeah, if that were true, that would be pretty important to note. But instead, it's like this kind of like, oh, wait, when you look at it that way, it actually does not absolve him of anything. So I don't know. I just feel like that's important to state because so many people seem to be running with whatever, I guess, suits their preconceived notions.
So after that, there was some back and forth about what today was going to be about. And today was going to be about a motion in limine filed by the prosecution. And I'll make it as clear as possible. I'll make it insultingly simplistic. Basically, when a prosecutor files a motion in limine, like they did in this case, it's to tell the defense, put up or shut up. You've been talking about Odinism. Put up or shut up. If you have evidence that actually is relevant and is material and connects these particular Odinists to the crime, show it to us in court, and then you can use it in the trial. And if you don't have such evidence, if you're just talking out of your hat, then you're not going to be allowed to use it in the trial. And so they made these requests, these put up or shut up requests about a variety of things. I think most important for our purposes today, one of them was about Odinism. One of them was about Kegan Klein, which will be very interesting.
That will be quite interesting for longtime listeners.
And one was about Ron Logan. I think those were the ones that dominated the day.
Yeah, it was kind of a smorgasbord of people who are brought up in this case as far as suspects. That was interesting. And I will say this again, people kind of often are like, well, can the judge just take away their, little Odinism theory? Is that right? And first of all, I think it's such a bad theory that she would be doing them a huge favor to force them to recalibrate and pump the brakes on what they're doing. So, I don't think it would be a huge tragedy for them personally, even though I'm sure it would be very frustrating. But second of all, we don't want to live in a system where, basically I can just look out the window of the courthouse and point to some guy and say, I think he did it. Don't look at my client. You don't want that, because then it makes witch hunts a lot easier. You have to have rules of evidence. You have to have you can't just bring whatever. I can't bring in Bozo the clown to point the finger and say, this is what happened. You have to have evidentiary standards and make your case based on that. Even when you're the defense, you want the defense to have a larger latitude. They're not bound by the same rules as the prosecution. But at the same time, you don't want there just to be no rules at all, because that's not good.
Okay, so after all that was settled, and again, please remember, time was at a premium today.
This is our last day of doing that.
Time was at a premium. And because of that, we ran to almost 9 o'clock, and people were having to cut things out because they weren't able to use everything they wanted to use. They had to really just cut down to the bone. Keep that in mind when I tell you this. Andy Baldwin began the presentation by making an opening statement that I think was probably, about 45 minutes long?
Yes.
And this opening statement was basically him pretty much dryly and in an uninteresting manner, just reciting everything he was going to do later that day.
Andrew Baldwin can be a very engaging attorney to watch and to see him almost perform. He has kind of that theatrical element to him, that sort of kind of actor mode. We've seen him in this mode at times, and that when you see that, you might not be impressed by it because maybe you don't think it's borne out by facts, but you can also sort of appreciate it for what it is and find it compelling. He was not in that mode today at all.
And it was like 45 minutes. And also, please imagine what it would be like if at the beginning of an episode, I came on and dryly spoke for 15 minutes. It was like, well, we're going to do this and this. And at one point, Anya is going to make a reference to stealing cereal, and I'm going to make a confusing comparison to something. And then we do it.
Haven't you just described the show? Unfortunately, everyone's like, "What? How is that different from what I'm normally having to listen to?"
So he said, "Here's all these wonderful witnesses that are coming up, and here's all the things that they will say." And I don't know if you really want to. I took notes on this thing.
Are you talking about Dr. Zolan?
No, I'm talking about the argument.
Oh, I'm sorry. The argument.
The opening statement.
Okay, well, yeah.
So I don't know how much you want to talk about.
I don't think we need to. Well, one thing I will say, and they break into this more later, but what the defense is now alleging is that the timeline that the state has put out there is off. That was one thing he mentioned in his opening.
And the other thing about the opening, and I know you think this is particularly significant, and it also came out later, but it was revealed that contrary to the impression some people have had and have put out there, the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI actually took a look at this crime and concluded that it was not a ritual murder.
And that these were not Odinist runes, and that in fact, this was what they call undoing. So when a killer is undoing a crime scene, they're essentially trying to obscure their crimes, maybe as a measure of, maybe it's like, I never did it. So you cover up the body with a blanket. That's undoing. So when the FBI saw these sticks, when they analyzed it, that's what they said. This is completely contrary to everything that's been at least strongly implied to us before, that the BAU was fully Team Odin. So this was shocking to me, because I was at least thinking, well, listen, I've expressed at times, I think criminal profiling can be a very useful tool for an investigation. I think in the pop culture, it gets kind of used irresponsibly, and just people are just wish casting what they want out of a crime. But I think used responsibly, it's fine. But we're going to learn about some things that make me feel even more comfortable with profiling compared to what else is out there. But yeah, I was really surprised. So the BIU came in, they actually did do something, and it was to say that they completely disagrey with this analysis. So we don't know any more details on that report or what exactly was done, but that was stated pretty clearly today.
And then I will say at the end, I think probably the most interesting thing about the argument came at the end, where Baldwin said, well, these are all the things we're going to say, but folks, we don't really have to prove anything we've just said. We just have to offer just a little bit of evidence. And if there's just a little bit of evidence for it, that'll be enough for the judge to let it in. And then when prosecutor Nick McClellan stood up, he said, well, no, actually, what Mr. Baldwin said is not an accurate statement of the law. And he said that the standard is that these things should not be included in the trial unless there is direct and material connection between the third party based on evidence that is admissible at trial.
Which is fun because a lot of times, or at least twice that I remember, the defense made a really big deal about, the defense attorney's best friend, polygraph exams, because those are so reliable and definitely not inadmissible in court. And when I talk to defense attorneys, I don't feel like a lot of them are a huge fan of polygraphs because they're notoriously unreliable and often just test how stressed out someone is. And guess what? You can be really stressed out and completely innocent. And you can also be cool as a cucumber and completely guilty. So I really don't put a lot of stock in them. So the fact that they kept on being like, and look at this polygraph was like, and Nick McClellan kept on objecting around those, like, that's not going to be allowed at trial. You can't just bring that in here. So that was, I guess, foreshadowing for what was to come.
So then Baldwin says, okay, I'm going to call my first witness. It's going to be Jerry Holman. And if they were able to call Jerry Holman, Anya and I would have been able to have lunch on time.
Yeah.
That's my prediction. But
with or without Jerry Holman.
Jerry Holman, I believe, was down in the prosecutor's office. I don't think he knew that he was going to be the first person called. And so Holman said, so he wasn't available at that moment. So Baldwin said, well, that's no problem. I'll call my expert, my subject matter expert, Dawn.
No, it's Zolan Perlmutter, I think is what they ended up spelling.
Okay.
I thought it was Dawn at first too, based on how he said it. Baldwin, oddly enough, he was very articulate the other day. Like you could hear him pretty well. Today, I don't know whether he wasn't feeling well or what happened, but he was a lot harder to hear than he had been. Yeah.
I'm going to be blunt here. We're going into some detail in a minute.
I'm sorry. It was Dawn. I don't know where I got Zolan.
I didn't know where you got Zolan either.
I'm very tired. I'm very tired. I'm sorry. It's Dawn. It's DAWN. Let's just move on. Jesus goodness.
And that's what I'm trying to do. Don't want to embarrass anybody here.
God. Too late.
Well, somebody's going to be a lot more embarrassed in a bit. So I don't know what you want to say about this witness, but she was on the stand for, was it over 2 hours?
Yeah.
And I'm going to be blunt with you. Complete waste of time.
This witness,
complete garbage witness.
Garbage witness, disaster.
Completely worthless.
She's an adjunct professor in the forensic medicine program at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. Okay. And
has some degrees in art history.
That's helpful. And basically comes out with this absolute, immediately in my notes, there's a lot of the use of the term bullshit, where she is alleged by Baldwin and the way he described her credentials, I'm like, uh-oh. Like just something about this was like, this doesn't sound good. But she's alleged to have, taught the feds how to look for a ritualistic crime scene and does all these trainings and whatnot. And like teaches people. But then you find out that seemingly from what they said, she's only ever testified in 3 murder cases. And one was in the U.S. Virgin Islands. One, it's not clear where it was. And then one was in the United States. Her big claim to Odinism expertise is that she has worked on a case that she thinks involves Odinism, but is currently open. So, I mean, that's her theory. I don't know if that's been confirmed yet.
It was a complete disaster.
She was a disaster. I was shocked that they asked her here.
Incredibly poor witness. But she they asked her because she was a warm body who said this is a textbook case of ritual murder. I stopped taking notes.
Oh, I was riveted, Kevin.
I stopped taking notes.
I was like, I was shocked. I was in shock.
I want to say a couple of things about the cross exam, but before we get there, is there anything else you wanted to say about her direct examination?
So she talks.
Take the floor.
I'll just take the floor. So she came out with all this stuff about this nonsense about, the things I look for are like, if a crime's outside, well, then that tells us something about it. And if a crime's with a knife, well, then it might be a ritualistic killing. And it was like a whole checklist of what she's looking for. In addition, one thing that immediately raised my hackles was, I look at ritualistic killings. That's my expertise. But also, all ritualistic killings are different. It's all just about the killer. It's like, well, then what the frick is the point? Then why are you here? Let me just say, she threw around the term magical thinking. Oh my God. No, I can't. Let me go off because I've been holding this in all day. She brings up the term magical thinking a lot. Magical thinking means like somebody who is believes that if you sacrifice a chicken to Odin, he'll grant you good grain crops for the year. So that's magical thinking. She throws this term around. I felt like frickin' Joan Didion because I had to endure a year of friggin' magical thinking by the end of this. This went on forever. He did direct examination. Yes, I do enjoy that, but he did direct examination for far too long. But to make it worse, can I just talk about this? I'm nitpicking, but I need to get this out. I'm sorry. This woman, Jesus, she at one point, several times actually, talks about how her methodology is essentially it's the opposite, or it's not the opposite. It's more anthropological than it is psychological. So the BAU at the FBI will tell you this killer is a sexual sadist, and Don Perlmutter will look and say, I think he might be a Midwestern Scandinavian. It's it's hokey nonsense, and I don't care if she's written some books or some chapters on this. This is the astrology of crime scene analysis. Okay, this is somebody who's coming in with an agenda, and we're going to get to that later because it became pretty apparent what her agenda was. But she kept on saying, well, I take this methodology as an academic, and it's very different from the Western rational thought. And it's like, just the optics of calling the opposing thinking rational. I mean, like that makes us in the world of irrationality here, as far as I'm concerned. And that I felt like I was maybe like dreaming through a lot of the beginning here because it was so bad.
It was a disaster. It was a disaster.
I can't believe I guess we'll get to the timeline of this because it's relevant to our previous reporting, but we'll get to the timeline, I guess, during our discussion of the just insane cross-examination.
So I want to give credit where credit is due. Nick McClelland did this cross-examination of this expert, and he was brilliant. It was a brilliant cross-examination.
It was the most devastating.
I was going to say it is the most devastating cross-exam I have ever seen, and I am including episodes of Perry Mason.
Yeah.
This just
he demolished her. It was I didn't feel bad for her because stuff came out that I just kind of was like, you're just you're a charlatan. But I felt bad for her.
She said, one of the ways you can tell if a murder is like Odinist if it's done outdoors. But he said, well, are there murders outdoors that aren't Odinist? And she agreed. And he also said, well, an Odinist could even commit a murder in theory, and it wouldn't be an Odinist murder. And she agreed to that. And he said, well, have you ever, in all of your vast experience, seen Odinists target two white girls? No, she's not.
also, yeah, has she ever seen evidence of a Odinist ritual murder? Well, that open case, but if it's open, then I think there's a pretty good possibility that it has nothing to do with Odinism.
And Nick said, well, when you look at and you study one of these crimes, is it important to look at statements made by the defendant? And she said, oh, yes, absolutely. And then she said, well, she hadn't really looked at any of Rick Allen's confessions. And
nor she looked at anything about Brad Holder's alibi.
I was about to give that. Is it important to look at the alibi of the person you are basically accusing? And that's not my area. She's never looked at Brad Holder's deposition or his alibi or even his Facebook, or she's not even looked at any of the evidence against Richard Allen. McClellan said, oh, so the only evidence you looked at is what the defense spoon fed you. And she said, well, I looked at what they provided. So yes.
That's a synonym.
So I don't know what industry you're in, but are there industry standards for what you do when you look at crime scene? And she said, well, we have crime scene conferences.
They're not working.
And she kept on talking about what the symbols mean. And McClellan said, well, you're just guessing at what these symbols mean because only the killer would know. And he said he also worked in some of the stuff from yesterday because he said, if instead of a knife, if a box cutter were used, would that change your interpretation? And of course, it was revealed yesterday in the testimony of Jerry Holman that Richard Allen says he committed the murder with a box cutter.
Yes, indeed. And I'm just going to note a couple when she was asked, well, if the defendant were to be confessing to the crime and basically doing all this and providing details and saying that he used a knife, would that change your opinion at all? No. Because that's not what she was brought in to do.
She did look at these Facebook posts from Brad Holder. So he said, well, can you tell from Facebook posts alone the Brad Holder participates in Odin's ritual killings? No. Can you tell that he participated in this killing? No. Can you tell that he participates in animal sacrifice? No. Is there anything in those posts that place him at the scene of this crime? No.
Honestly, it was amusing at times, but it's honestly incredibly depressing that this is who they brought up as their expert.
And he says, he also asked, McClellan asked, since you've said that crime scenes in these ritual things are so highly personalized, don't you think it's important to get as much information as possible about the person you are accusing? And all you got were a few Facebook posts from Brad Holder. Didn't you look at anything? And no.
Anything about him as a person that would lend credence to any of this. And again, I just want to emphasize her whole methodology is I look for symbols. It's guess what? That's called drawing too many conclusions based on patterns that only you see. That's not a skill set.
And she said one of the reasons why she knew that this was a ritual murder was because it was obviously not sexually motivated. So McClellan said, why do you say it was not sexually motivated? And she said, well, there was no sexual assault mentioned in the autopsy. And then McClellan said, can a crime be sexually motivated, but could the murder occur before the assault happens? And that was interesting to me because that was an interesting way of phrasing it. It reminded me that yesterday, Brian Harshman said that Richard Allen had revealed his motivation for this crime.
So a crime, just to be clear in case we're just too tired to convey this, if someone attacks a victim with the intent of committing some sort of sexually based crime and then kills them prior to the crime happening to the sexual assault, then that's still a sexually based crime because that was the motivation.
And I believe with that question, prosecutor Nicholas McClellan was suggesting that this crime was sexually motivated, but that the murder happened before the sexual assault occurred.
And can I just say something? You have two teenage girls, a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, who were forced to strip as part of the commission of this crime. And you're telling me that's not giving any indications of a sexually motivated crime? Are you kidding me? Forget who did it. forget Richard Allen, forget Brad and Holder and the gang. What the heck? I mean, I don't know. Whatever.
She also said, obviously, the sticks that were left on the bodies were symbols and not meant to cover the bodies. And she said that was because they didn't completely cover the bodies. And McClelland said, well, if the defendant said the sticks were placed there to cover the body, would that change your mind about them being symbols? And she said, no. Would it change your mind to know that the defendant admitted he killed the girls? And she said, no. And then her interpretation of, as we know by the crime scene, there was a tree that had a symbol on it in blood. Or I'm misspeaking. The tree has a shape on it that some people say looks like an F. Other people say looks like an upside down L. And the defense has suggested that that is actually a symbol put on there to suggest something about Odinism. And this expert witness said it obviously was, and it couldn't have been blood splatter. And so McClelland said, well, what is your experience as a blood splatter expert? And she had none. And I guess, did she have any expert?
I think she had some minor training in crime scene investigation techniques, but frankly, who knows what that even means?
Well, he says you have no training in blood splatter, so how can you rule that out? And she's, well, I can rule it out because of the appearance and the context. And I know about other cases where there have been markings on a tree.
It's like
so if you know of one case where there's a marking on a tree, that means in any case where there's anything on the tree, it must be a symbol.
I've never seen anything like this. I mean, I know that not every expert has to be a scientist or use the scientific method, but there's something really insane. And I would encourage everyone, listen to our episode with Dr. Stephen Novella. We'll include it in our link to in our show notes, because that was, you don't just come in with, I don't come in and say Kevin must be a Martian from Mars and let me do everything to prove that. I've got to rule stuff out. You have to rule out what you want it to be. And then if you can't, and maybe that's duplicatable, maybe you have something. But like this woman, literally her whole methodology seems to be, these are the symbols I want to see. Or these are the,
golly, here they are.
Here they are. Here's what they mean. Context. And then refuse to back down off of that. Don't let anything like, learning about the alleged perpetrators bother you. Just lock it down.
And then McClelland asked her, would you agree that it is important before you make a final analysis or conclusion about something? Is it important for you to actually look at the relevant materials you're analyzing? And she said, sure, yeah. And then he said, well, when did you get the relevant materials to analyze in this case? And she said, well, I got them sometime in April 2024.
Can we highlight why that's important?
Yes, because, go ahead.
You know why. Because, and I'll include a link to this one too. So Lauren Crow, the head of the Troth, which is a inclusive, pro-LGBTQ, anti-racist pagan group, heathens, that we've had her on the show a lot of times. She's awesome. She told us that in mid-April, Andrew Baldwin, the attorney in this case, called her, essentially begging her to be a subject matter expert for his team to talk about Odinism and related topics. That was in April.
So he didn't get her.
He did not get her.
Woman. So again, let me get back to where I was. She has just admitted you need to look at evidence before you make a conclusion. And she has said, well, I first looked at the evidence in this case in April of 2024. And Nick McClelland pointed out, well, isn't that interesting? Because in September of 2023, you appeared on court TV and you gave an analysis of this case at a time you had not observed any evidence from the case. And you said that it was a classic ritual murder. And you said this based on material you looked at that came from a motion that the defense wrote and filed.
Oops. So she made up her mind.
Based on a motion filed by the defense. And obviously the defense, when they make a motion, they're arguing a case. So she's getting one side and she's drawing conclusions on national TV. And McClelland said, well, obviously you make money by appearing as a witness and doing consultants And it would probably look pretty bad if you give an opinion on national TV that something's a ritual murder, and then once you look at the actual evidence, if you changed your mind. So maybe that's part of the reason why you so stubbornly insist on this.
I was really disgusted when I heard that, to be honest, because I mean, if like, as you said, it's like a warm body to say what they want to say. And to a certain extent, you have to regard all case experts, whether they're coming in for the prosecution or the defense, with a level of skepticism, because to a certain extent, they're all on a team and they're playing for that team. But you can do that job with honesty and candor and with an open mind, perhaps, where you're not completely committing whatever the hell this was. I was disgusted. And I know it sounds like we're being hard on her, but like, you're coming into a murder case to put your methodology to use, and then it turns out you've already made up your mind months before based on nothing.
Well, I think the real person to criticize here is Andrew Baldwin.
Yeah, in fairness, yes.
I think this was a poor choice, and also, as I say, while he was spending, I think it was over 2 hours, right, with this witness.
It felt like, again, a year of magical thinking. I'll make that joke again.
There were other witnesses waiting to be called, and some of their time had to be cut short because of all of the time devoted to this witness and to his long, lengthy opening statement. And there were some pretty important witnesses that I feel didn't get as much time and attention as they should because of this nonsense. And I'm not going to lie to you, it was nonsense. This was a complete waste of time. And in some sense, yes, it is on her, but in some larger sense, he was the one that brought her in. He was the one who prepared her. He was the one who thought, yes, this is a good idea to spend a couple of hours on this busy day and delay everyone's lunch so she can...
It's not just delay everyone's lunch, though. I know you're being silly and facetious there, but it's a waste of everybody's time. We're supposed to be here to get at why should this trial include a whole sideshow about Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Elvis Fields, and Johnny Messer, and a plethora of other people who are allegedly in this Odinist cult who sacrificed the girls in the woods. I want to get down into what is the evidence against them specifically, not just, oh, someone thinks these sticks are runes. You know, I mean, frankly, it would be nice to have the BAU backing them up on that, but they couldn't get there, so they had to bring in this person, you know, but that's what it's supposed to be about. It's not this, like, a chance to have this nonsense go on forever, and I was appalled. It was a waste of everybody's time. It was a waste of the court's time, frankly. Like, I mean, I was insulted, and I mean, like, get serious about this. Like, you couldn't find anyone else, and you know what? If you can't find anyone else, then maybe you're wrong. Maybe the Odinist theory is weak and crumbling under its own weight.
And I got to tell you, everybody I talked to in the courtroom about that witness was appalled.
People, you know, you talk to people in the press, you talk to case observers, you talk to some people who tend to be more sympathetic with the defense. You talk to some people who are more sympathetic with the prosecution. You talk to some people who are undecided. They don't really know. They're just kind of here to listen and hear everyone out. I didn't hear anyone be like, wow, that was really good. That was powerful. And I just...
not about her testimony.
No, not about her testimony.
I heard a lot of comments like that about his cross-examination.
Oh, people, yeah.
Including, I came back from lunch and I'm in the gallery and I'm sitting next to you. I think you were talking to someone and I wasn't. I was staring straight ahead. And Baldwin and McClelland are talking a few feet away from me. And during this lunch break, Andrew Baldwin said that was a great cross man.
Yeah.
Even Baldwin realized.
Baldwin was correct about that. But frankly, I give Nick a lot of credit for that. But with Andy, it's like, you know, you didn't, like, that's like, like, you just gave him, you know, like it's in volleyball where you, like, set him up to spike your side. And he did a great job with it. But, like, it's like a boxer who's not putting his hands up to defend himself. It's like, why would you put yourself in the situation where you get that owned by somebody? Like, you didn't listen to what this person was saying and think, well, actually, this sounds really stupid. Let me get out of here. You know, I mean, they could have had somebody come on who just knew a little bit about Odinism and maybe was generally like more neutral on it. It was less of a yes man, but perhaps wouldn't have looked as ridiculous. I mean, I was appalled. And again, like, I'm sorry, I don't like being mean and snarking on people, but we would be doing you a disservice if we gave you anything less than what we felt about this, because I feel like this is like a whole very extreme symptom of a wider problem with this theory and how the defense is handling it.
So after lunch, the first witness was Jerry Holman. And he was asked by Baldwin some questions about sketch 1 and sketch 2. These are the sketches of like an older looking gentleman and a younger looking gentleman who are said to be bridge guy. And Holman says, I've always thought that those two sketches were the same person. And Baldwin says, well, here's a press release from the United States Police, which says otherwise. What do you think of that? And McClellan said, well, it's not on him to tell you what the Indiana State Police as a whole thinks. He can just tell you what he himself thinks. And Baldwin said, oh, yeah, that's interesting. But oh, look at this press release. And McClellan says, well, you know, the press release is, you know, the court can look at that and it speaks for itself. You don't need to go through it line by line and torturing Holman over it. And so Baldwin said, oh, yeah, I guess so. And then that was the end of the testimony.
I'm going to say this. McClellan was more quiet the first 2 days, I think, but he was really on fire today. I think this was probably one of his best days in courts. I mean, I think certainly the cross-examination was the highlight that we discussed already, but he was very, very, very on point. So I thought he did really well, and he was not really letting a lot slide today. For what I could see, at least. That's my opinion.
So that ended that testimony pretty quickly. And then the next witness was Amber Holder. Do you want to go through this or you want me to?
Yeah, no, Amber Holder was interesting. She actually, I didn't, maybe this was in some of the, I mean, one problem with some of these is that like all the information is already included in hearings. So you kind of feel like, what are we getting here? But she revealed some things that I was not aware of. And one of those things essentially got into, she actually practices she worships, as she phrased it, she worships the old Norse gods. And the way she told the story, she and Brad Holder were only married for a few months in 2018. And she more of seemingly, he adopted her religion. He didn't bring her into it. He got into it through her. And so she indicated that he was kind of conflicted because he was from a Christian family. She kind of indicated that his he's like from a number of generations of Christian preachers. And so he felt somewhat conflicted and maybe like at times wanted to worship both. And so I didn't really realize that she was more of the driving force with the Odinism. She also, I mean, she kind of pushed back against Baldwin a few times, and he was gracious about it. But she's like, there's no such thing as Odinism. Like we call ourselves, the way she phrased it was we worship the ancient Norse gods. And then she was then there was other stuff that she said that was very much what we've heard before.
Yeah, basically that Brad Holder at one point said that he and Patrick Westfall had some sort of a disagreement in the woods about involving sacrifices, and that somehow strained the relations between the two men, and they were no longer friends. And so I think we're probably supposed to think that was about the Delphi case, but she indicated that he never specifically said it was about the Delphi case. And was that about it?
That there was also the most egregious one where Brad Holder indicated that Patrick Westfall, his former friend, killed Abby Williams, and that she would need to keep her mouth shut. And that they cut their hands over a wooden a metal bowl as part of some ritual. And Dr. Perlmutter thinks that if people start sacrificing animals and cutting their hands, human sacrifice is just down the lane. That was like how, I mean, I phrased it in a snarky way, but that is basically what she said at one point. And it really wasn't particularly interesting because, first of all, I guess maybe we're burned out by coverage of other cases, but you would be surprised by how many times, like, I tend to, when people like have these kind of like weird pseudo kind of implications and confessions, I actually don't necessarily tend to discount the witness. I tend to perhaps discount the person making it, the confession. We have seen this many, many times where you have sketchy men who want to scare people in their lives, so they sort of darkly imply things about what they were doing around an infamous crime. This happened a lot in the Burger Chef murders case. If you ask people in the Indianapolis area, everybody seems to sometimes have an evil uncle or an awful cousin who was really into drugs, who came back with a, kind of a, van that night and then said, "Don't tell anyone where I was today." And, they all think that they're the ones who committed the crime, but without more corroborating evidence or something that's more than just her claiming that he said this, I think it kind of goes nowhere, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? Am I giving it too much credibility? Do you think she was just making it up?
No, she seemed credible to me, but the question is, was he credible?
Yeah. And honestly, can I just say, like, it was weird that Baldwin didn't focus more in on the one that was more about, like, I think Patrick Westphal did this, or like, why not hone in on that? But she didn't really have any details. It was like Brad Holder would get drunk and say things and then she'd repeat them, but she seemed not really willing to go any further with it.
Yeah. And a story without evidence is just a story. So this was a story. The next witness was Kevin Murphy. This is one of the investigators who worked the so-called Odinism lead very, very hard, but was ultimately unable to come up with solid evidence for it.
Yes, he worked in the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force along with a investigator named Greg Ferenczi. And along with Todd Click, they sort of made up what I think of as like the Odinism triumvirate, where they were all working on that angle together. And he indicated that he left the state police in 2021, although he was quick to say that he was not fired, he retired.
Left on good terms.
Good standing. And he indicated that he worked on the Delphi case specifically from February 21st, 2017 to October 1st, I think he said, 2019. So he was there early on when they were like bringing in a lot of people. A lot of people were working this case early on. And then at some point he left.
But while he was working the case sometime prior to Christmas of 2017, he said he got a tip that a man in Rushville named Elvis Fields had told family members that he had killed the girls. And what they decided to do was to arrange for someone who knew Fields to make what is called a controlled phone call, where this person would call Fields and try to steer the conversation around to the crime in a subtle manner and get incriminating statements, perhaps, which would be recorded. But the call went south because this person, relatively early on in the call, just suddenly blurted out, "Elvis, why did you kill those girls?"
Can we explain who that is?
Sure.
Okay, so it's Mary Jacobs, which is Elvis Fields' sister, and she came to police with this tip, very urgent, that she believed her brother had done this, that he came back and said all these incriminating things, so she made a big deal about it and got in touch with police about it.
Murphy said at some point he had a conversation with the prosecutor about this lead. It wasn't entirely clear to me if the prosecutor he spoke to was Nick McClelland or his predecessor, Ives.
Robert Ives, yeah. I think they cleared that up because at one point McClelland was like, "But I didn't start until 2018." And he said, "Oh, no, it would have been in 2018.
But he said that when he told the prosecutor about the lead, the prosecutor said, "Well, if it's got legs, run with it." So it sounds like the prosecutor was encouraging.
Yeah, that sounds like it was handled appropriately. One thing kind of I've kept an eye out for is like, is there any indication that, Unified Command came down with an iron fist and told these guys, back off the Odinism investigation. You're getting too close. Oh, I mean, and it seems like everything I hear is that it was looked into. And that's kind of what it was like. That's how an investigation works.
It was looked into thoroughly.
Just because it didn't have an optimal outcome for Richard Allen or the defense doesn't mean they did it wrong.
And not enough evidence was found to lead to an arrest.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know.
So Murphy actually ended up interviewing Elvis Fields in the company of Jerry Holman. In the course of this interview, he got a swab from Elvis, and at the conclusion of this interview, they were dropping, or I guess Murphy was dropping Fields off, and this is when Fields
said he felt bad for the guy, so he gave him a ride home to his trailer.
Yeah, this is when Fields made the famous comment, if it turns out that you test that and find out that I spit on the girls, would I be in trouble? And Murphy said he just gave kind of a quick BS answer and left, but he said he regrets that and wishes he had encouraged further conversation.
And let me just say that at this point, especially, this witness took on a very, how would you describe it? I'm trying to be sensitive here. It was very intense. He seemed to be taking things in a very intense way on the stand. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Like, it wasn't just like, it was like, palpable, like, I have regrets, like, very intense.
He said, I made a mistake.
I'm human.
And then he was shown some crime scene photos.
Yeah, this was upsetting.
And he got very emotional and started to cry. He said, it's tough. And it sucks.
Yeah, he yelled out, it sucks. And he like kind of threw his head up. Like, he got very, very upset pretty quickly. I just, I felt genuinely bad for him. It was a little disturbing to watch, honestly. But then again, we know how upsetting that stuff can be. So I felt for him. And just because someone's a police officer doesn't mean that they don't have, feelings about this stuff. So I can imagine it was upsetting. And it sounds like he's left the state police. But I mean, it's definitely a very disturbing case. So it sticks with you.
Then it was time for cross-examination. And Prosecutor McClellan brought out that at some point, Kevin Murphy had apparently come to the conclusion that Elvis Fields was just toying with him. And apparently at some point, some of Mary Jacobs' credibility became, he began to doubt her because when he visited her home, he saw quite a bit of mental health medicines.
And now you can certainly have mental illness and be treating that and still be credible and telling the truth. But that's not what Murphy seemed to think, at least in statements he made in the past. He indicated that he felt that both Elvis and Mary Jacobs were, quote, full of crap.
That's what he said to McClellan.
That's what he said to McClellan in the past.
And McClellan said, were you ever able to find evidence to put Brad Holder in Delphi at the time of the crime? No. Never found any physical evidence tying them to the crime. So it doesn't sound like the defense was meeting its obligation to come up with relevant information of a material nature.
Not at all. And I'm going to say this, again, this is about, when Murphy originally walked into Mary Jacobs' house and saw all this medication, he said on the stand, quote, as soon as I saw it, I gave up, end quote. And also indicated that in previous times, Elvis, quote, pissed me off, end quote, because he thought that Elvis was just playing him about the spit comment. He didn't think it was for real. So it's like, now, unfortunately, it looks like he's starting to torture himself over this. But frankly, from my perspective, it sounds like this team did an adequate job running down these leads and they didn't get anywhere. I don't think that was for lack of trying. I also think these law enforcement officials who were part of the Odinism theory, I mean, they were working under the auspices of Unified Command. They were doing their jobs. They did their jobs. And, their job is not to make sure that they get a conviction. Their job is to go where the evidence leads them. And if there's maybe a bit of smoke and they can't find a fire, that's it. If there's, I don't know what they were supposed to do really. So I guess I just, encouraging detectives to basically, stick to your first guy and just because they gave, just because you worked a lot on them must mean that must be the guy. Like, I don't know. It just seems like I don't really see what the issue is. They looked into them and then they didn't find enough evidence and that's it. I mean, am I missing something?
I mean, yeah, I don't think you are. I think the point of police work is to investigate, and you're not necessarily going for a specific outcome. You just want truth. And if the truth is this person you suspected, there's not enough evidence, maybe they didn't do it.
And let's be honest, we're all human, right? We tend to think things that we are involved in are important. If something goes down at my job here at the Murder Sheet, that's very important to me. If I am involved in looking into a specific case, and in that case, like something happens in it, that's important to me. So I can imagine for a detective, if there is a theory or a suspect that you are specifically assigned to that becomes your every waking moment, you're focused on running this down and figuring it out, I think there might be a tendency to feel like that has outsized importance compared to everyone else and what they're doing. And that's a natural human tendency. I'm not criticizing them for that. But that also doesn't mean that you have the right suspect or that you ever got to probable cause.
Absolutely not.
So, and just because you feel that there was something there doesn't really matter.
And I'm going to interrupt you because a lot of what you're saying about Murphy also applies to the next witness, who was Todd Click.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us all about Todd Click?
Todd Click is the former assistant police chief of Rushville, Indiana, which is a town to, I believe, the south of Indianapolis, somewhere down south. I don't know. I'm not from Indiana, so it's not close to Delphi. But this is a man. He was the sort of another person in this group, along with Murphy and Ferenczi, who unfortunately was murdered. And he worked on this. They essentially kind of came down to Rushville to interview and to look into this kind of connection. And he was setting up the sound equipment for them. This is what came out today. And he ended up kind of clicking with them. No pun intended. That was not intended to be a pun. I'm really tired. That was not a pun. Sometimes I'm really good at accidentally punning. You know this. Don't give me that look. But he ended up connecting with them and really liking, I think getting invested in this investigation and working on the angle with them. So I kind of got the sense that they sort of became a unit after that and worked on this. And he brought the local knowledge because Murphy and Ferenczi were outsiders, but he could say, well, here's what Elvis Fields is like, or here's, and he was the one who found the picture that showed that, I guess, Brad Holder knew Johnny Messer through some Vinlander community. So Johnny Messer knows Elvis Fields, so much has been made of this. Do you want to go on?
You continue.
Well, let me just say one thing that kind of was a problem for me with what they were saying too. A lot was made about Elvis mimicking Brad Holder's Facebook. If you listen to our show, you've listened to an episode with an excellent researcher named Thomas, who's great and did a wonderful job. He essentially took all of these allegedly mimicked Facebook posts from both pages, as many as he could find, and put them side by side and just looked at them. And his idea was like, let's see if they're similar. Like, is there something there where he, because it's one thing to say like they're posting on each other's walls. Then you could say, well, they kind of know each other. But if someone's just mimicking, what does that even mean? I've never heard of that. And so what he found was that a lot of these photos that they're alleging to be mimicked are incredibly generic. They just are. They're not, or they're not that similar. They're like maybe in the same genre, but they end up looking kind of different. And I think when you're talking about something as if you want to say they both knew Johnny Messer, by all means, that's fine. They had mutual friends. I think that's good enough. You don't, what's with this mimic nonsense? And frankly, Click, and I thought this was smart of him. I respected this. He indicated, I think at one point, didn't he? Oh no, was it Click or Murphy? One of them. They both kind of seemed to like not really want to talk about the mimicked aspect of it. Like it was kind of like, well, they both know Messer. And again, I think that's correct. I think Messer's fine, but this mimic stuff, it doesn't hold water as far as I'm concerned.
And again, to me, the most important part of this witness's testimony was a few questions at the end of cross-examination. Were you ever able to place Brad Holder in Delphi at the time of the murder? No. Any evidence linking Brad Holder to the crime scene? Well, he liked runes, but no evidence was found. Do you agree with the defense that it was a ritual murder? No. Todd Click believes that Abby and Libby made fun of the ritual the guys were performing, and they got upset and killed them for it. And it was brought out that Click has earlier admitted to Dave Vito of the Indiana State Police said there was no concrete evidence against his suspects. It was just all circumstantial. And Todd Click has never seen the alibi evidence for Holder. So
it's so funny. So many people were like so pissed off at us when we reported accurately that Todd Click told us, which he did, that he did not believe in the ritual sacrifice element of this. And, you know, that he still believed in the fact that the same people did the murders, but that he didn't believe in that element. And it just shows you like there is such a cult around these defense attorneys, because even if you have basically almost the same views like Todd Click, if you're a little bit away from them on one specific issue, then that's not okay. And if you report on that, then, you know, you are a target and, you know, you must be bad and lying. But what he said today completely corroborated exactly what he told us. And let me just say this, like, I get what he's saying, and I tend to agree with, I tend to think that Todd Click's version of events is a lot easier to digest for me than the ritual murder. I think the ritual murder thing is something out of a stupid pulp novel. I think things going wrong at the scene, to me, I can buy that a lot more. I can certainly buy that a lot more. So I appreciate Todd Click's version more than theirs. That being said, what he described was that they're basically laughing at these guys in their ritual. And like, I don't know, nothing what I've heard about the personalities of these two kids makes me think that, first of all, they would be like loudly mocking other people's rituals. I mean, I don't know, maybe. Teenagers are teenagers, right? They can be snarky and maybe insensitive, but like to the point where then they're like, you know, assaulted and killed. It just, I don't know. I think it's better than what the defense currently has, but I still have some questions about that, I guess, or maybe problems with it, I should say.
And again, for me, the key thing is he acknowledged there was no direct evidence that these people were actually involved in the crime.
Yeah.
And so that means that the defense did not meet its obligation to present this material evidence that they needed in order to be allowed to discuss this at the trial.
Right.
Next witness also is Dave Vito, who we just mentioned. He's a detective with the Indiana State Police. And this also marked a transition to Kegan Klein.
Yeah, this is not something I had on my bingo card. I know it was probably listed and stuff, but I just kind of forgot about it. So suddenly when they started talking about Kegan Klein, I was like, what? Am I going to wake up and like, I'm going to be in the, you know, Miami County courthouse? What's happening?
And also I wanted to mention that basically we'll tell you what they said. It's just further confirmation of stuff we reported on years ago.
Yeah, I don't want to, yeah.
And what's interesting is, like, the river search, people would say, oh, do you really think the river search was related to the case?
It's like, no, we just reported it on our show because we like to lie. Yes, of course we think that.
We don't think it, we know it.
We know it. We don't report stuff unless we know it.
We don't say something on the show unless we know it's true. And there have been people who have doubted some of the stuff we reported about Kegan Klein and his father, Tony Klein. And all of that stuff is confirmed in this testimony.
I was like, Rosie is just I mean, it was just wild.
Yeah, this direct examination of Vito was done by Brad Rosie.
Yeah, it was done by Brad Rosie. And I was just like, thank you, because like, this is a lot of stuff we've brought out to light. And we don't mess around with putting out stuff like with it was just, I don't know, I think so many people do that everyone just assumes that you're doing the same thing.
We're not.
But we're not. We're actually confirming things before we put them out there. And you know,
we wouldn't have reported on the river search unless we knew what it was about.
Yeah, we don't want to get something of that magnitude wrong. And so it was just a weird trip down memory lane, though, because I'm not used to these lawyers talking about Kegan Klein.
So basically, should I begin?
Hit it, yeah.
Vito confirmed that Libby German was communicating with Anthony Schatz on Snapchat. And Anthony Schatz, of course, was an account used by Kegan Klein. It is possible that Kegan Klein was not the only one using the Anthony Schatz name. Some of those communications could, at least in theory, have come from Kegan's father, Tony Klein.
And this is what Vito said, and this is
what we said.
And this is what we said.
Then there was a detail that I don't believe we knew, which is that Kegan Klein's friend,
I don't think we named him on the
I
show.
don't think we named him, so I won't, but his friend appeared in photos with a firearm that was not recovered, and this firearm was a Smith & Wesson .40 caliber, and of course the unspent round at the murder scene was also a .40 caliber.
So that's notable. I mean, it's notable because, let me just say, like, did Rosie get the wrong script? They're bringing him up as another third-party suspect to discuss.
Yes. I should have mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah. Like, they're Rosie's basically saying, doesn't Kegan Klein kind of look guilty, guys? What do you think?
So he talks about Kegan Klein having many devices that have child sexual abuse materials on them. They bring up that Kegan Klein and his father, Tony, went to Las Vegas right after the murders on a pre-planned trip. And at some point, Kegan's father, Tony, offered to pay Kegan Klein money to stay in Las Vegas. Kegan Klein did not have a good alibi for the date of the murders. He kept changing his story. But ultimately, the police were able to prove that Kegan Klein's phone was being used at his residence on the day of the murder.
On Canal Street in Peru. And in the same household, Tony Klein's phone was also being used in that household on the day of the murders.
Rosie said, you had concerns about his father's involvement, and Vito said, correct.
And I should note that Rosie did not hold back about Tony Klein. He went into his violent history, his history of abusing women.
Let me go into this.
Do it.
On August 21st of 2020, Vito had an interview with Tony Klein at the Purdue, Indiana State Police Post.
Was it Peru?
That's what I have in my notes. What do you have?
I thought you said Purdue.
Oh, Peru. There's
Boilermakers.
I'm tired too. He indicated that he was aware that Tony Klein had a history of violence. He was aware that Tony Klein had assaulted a child by shoving his head in the toilet. We actually interviewed that young man.
Yeah, just an awesome grown-up now who is, just talked about the trauma he went through, but as
And there was something about Tony Klein holding a shotgun
on Kegan's mother. Yeah, that's something Kegan mentioned.
And also that Tony Klein had a bad leg, and some people theorized that Bridge Guy had a bad leg because of a limp. Yeah,
and one problem I will say though with Tony Klein with Bridge Guy is that he has a much higher voice than you would expect. And does not
much higher voice.
Does not now listen, Bridge Guy's voice, that's not really like, I don't know how much they're gonna use that in trial because it's not a lot of words. So I don't think they could do like a vocal fingerprint or whatever, but he does not sound like Bridge Guy to me.
So while Kegan Klein's child sexual abuse materials case was pending, he reached out to Indiana State Police about the Delphi murders, and they interviewed him in August of 22 at Grissom Air Force Base. And during that interview, he told them a story. Do you want to share that?
His story was that on the day of the murders, he and his father, Tony Klein, drove to Delphi, Indiana from Peru in a red Jeep, and that they parked at the cemetery near the murder site, and that Tony got out, left for a while. When he came back, he was covered in blood, and he told Kegan that quote, something like they had a good time. And then they left, and then they drove over the bridge over the Wabash in Peru.
In their red Jeep.
In their red Jeep that we previously reported about, and that they that Kegan threw a cell phone into the Wabash and Tony threw a knife.
So this is why the Wabash was searched. They were looking for this particular knife and this particular cell phone.
And to be clear, Andrew Aki, the attorney for Kegan Klein at the time, arranged a lot of this. He arranged a whole meeting with Kegan Klein and investigators.
And what's interesting is Rosie kept on referring to Kegan Klein's attorney. And of course, Kegan Klein's attorney, as you say, was Andrew Aki, who was the former law partner of Brad Rosie.
It's like, you know who he is. Come on. He was in your profile episode, man.
So they did the search. They couldn't find anything. They also looked at traffic cams along the route that Kegan said he and his father were driving on the day of the murders, and no red Jeep appeared in any of that footage, which seems to disprove the story that Kegan Klein told.
That and the fact that Tony does not sound like Bridge Guy and Kegan is larger than Bridge Guy, and the fact that their phones seem to be in operation in their house on the day of the murders would be substantive evidence pointing away from them.
We've also said that the Wabash River search had nothing to do with the arrest of Richard Allen. A lot of people believe that it did.
But it didn't.
And this is more confirmation of that.
It just didn't. Not everything's connected. The other thing just came up at that time. And as we've said so many times, Kegan Klein and Tony Klein were a primary focus of the Delphi murders investigation for a while.
Doesn't mean they're guilty.
Doesn't mean they're guilty. But that's what the police were doing, and that's our job as journalists is not to just sit here and like make stuff up and like tell you our opinions. It is to figure out what the police are doing and tell you that.
Which we did accurately.
Yes. So it was again surreal. I think Rosie made some good points. There is a lot around Kegan. I don't know how good of a third-party suspect. I think he's certainly a significantly better third-party suspect than the Odinist, but it doesn't really seem like there was any evidence tying him to the crime scene.
I haven't been listening to him talk about Kegan Klein. I felt like I was getting a glimpse into an alternate reality where they started off by focusing on Kegan Klein and not mentioning Odinism at all. And I think that would have been a more successful venue for them.
You know, they did talk about, this was a bit of a bold move by Rosie, and I was kind of interested in it. They talked, you know, I'm not saying I'm sure he didn't intend it this way, and I certainly don't know what's in his head, but like it was almost like a bit of a taunting thing. It's like, you guys tried to find a connection between the Kleins and the Allens, didn't you? Kathy Allen, Richard Allen's wife, is from Peru, and of course, Richard Allen himself is from Mexico, Indiana, which is right next door. And so was there a connection? People have often pointed out that they used to live near each other. I think it's on like 2nd Avenue, or they may have lived near each other at one time. And that, you know, kind of, and what Vito said is that some people locally say that they know that they knew each other, but he has not been able to prove some sort of significant connection. And there's no digital records that indicate any extensive contact.
It is also potentially interesting because if even after the arrest of Richard Allen, investigators still believe Kegan Klein might be involved, which is why they'd be looking for a connection, that's a decent, at least beginning place for an argument that maybe... That's
a start for a third-party suspect.
Yes.
That's a start. And frankly, I always wondered if they didn't go for that was because they were worried he did know him. But that's just my take. I mean, like, I don't know. I think the fact that they brought it up today sort of indicates that they're probably confident that he didn't, because that would be really risky wise. But the problem with Kegan is Kegan, as we, you know, from listening to the show, he lies a lot. He's not he's not reliable. It sounds like he strung everybody along with this river search. Nothing was found. And there was no evidence that he was even there in Delphi that day. In fact, contrary, it looked like he was in Peru. So again, much better. And again, I thought Rosie was kind of on fire here. And it wasn't just because I'm interested in the Kegan Klein stuff. It was because I was like, this is all clicking. But I don't feel like it's still not great. Because there's just too much wrong with Kegan. But anyways, that was kind of a fascinating look back in time. I was like, well, we were much younger then.
And then the other defense attorney, Jennifer Auger, stood up and basically said, hey, let's talk about Ron Logan for a few minutes.
And that was just like a brief, weird interlude where she was like, Ron Logan, he had
What about that search warrant?
Hey, he had a search warrant. And hey, did you know he had a sweater in his laundry room? Was that what she said? Am I making that up? Or like, it was like...
It was the same color as something that Bridget
wore. Kind of weird. It's like, you know what? I bet a lot of us have one of those in our laundry rooms, Jennifer. You know, they really didn't go into Ron Logan at all. I mean, it's so funny because people always, you know, want to like, oh, well, you know, like Ron Logan's one of the contenders. And then like these guys are just, they don't want to go into Ron Logan at all. I don't think that's exciting. I mean, like I was surprised they went into Kegan as much as they did, but Logan definitely got the short end of the stick in this one. Can I just add, just while we're on like a look back in time, just more of as a fun, brief interlude, can you tell everyone what you did in the middle of the courtroom, which was adorable, but also very funny?
I was trying to avoid saying that.
So you have to understand about Kevin. Kevin and I are kind of opposites in some way. Like, we're very much the same person in most ways, but I am terrible at time management and often running late to things. And Kevin is very, very attempts to be punctual, and in fact gets really stressed out when he's not, where he's running late.
And it was well past lunchtime. We're finally released for lunch, but it's going to be a shorter lunch break because we spent all that time listening to this expert witness. And I don't know if there's a name for them, but you've seen those like plastic columns that are like lined up in rows, and they might have a ribbon connecting them. And these are used to basically control crowds. And there was one of these set up in the courtroom, and part of it was in an inconvenient area that made egress a challenge. And so a number of people would go underneath them. And I went underneath it being very hungry, and I did it poorly. And I caused a bunch of it to knock down. And you said, I didn't see this, but you said none other than Stacy Diener, one of the prosecutors, saw this and was appalled.
Well, I was. But
you said you apologized her on my behalf.
I did. Well, you were in like one of your weird frenzies where you weren't even like you were just like flailing around, like trying to hook it up, and but it was obvious that you weren't really like fully connected with the task at hand. So then I ended up setting it back up. Oh my God, bro! We're just awkward. We're awkward people. If you've hung out with us at one of these things, there's a group of people that kind of come to these, and it's nice to see them and kind of connect when we're waiting. But if you've done that, you know what we're like.
Nick talked a little bit about geofencing. Do you want to talk about that?
Can you talk about it? I don't remember.
He said geofencing is not an accurate science, and because of that, they don't even use it in PCAs.
Yeah, that's important to know. You can't use it to get to probable cause, because it's so unreliable that we could be talking about a few meters away or like 1,000 meters away, and that's a big difference.
And he said, let's grant the motion now not to talk about geofencing in the trial, but if they can come up with a reason that a particular bit of geofencing is reliable, then of course they could talk about that. And then that was the end of it for the defense presentation, and then it was Prosecutor McClelland's turn to call witnesses. And the first witness he called was Chris Cecil. He's a first sergeant with the Indiana State Police. He's actually the task force commander for the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force.
Yes.
And he's also a witness that we saw in the Kegan Klein.
Yeah, again, echoes of Kegan Klein. And let's just be clear, the Kegan Klein investigation started out as the Delphi murders investigation. That's why all the same people are working on it, and that's why they brought it up in this context. And so it flowed from one another. Doesn't mean that Kegan Klein has anything to do with the Delphi murders, but he was uncovered. His conversations with Liberty were uncovered, and that led to him being busted eventually.
So one thing that is a little bit different between the prosecution witnesses and the defense witnesses is that usually it was pretty easy to tell why the prosecution witnesses were called. And this witness was called because he extracted some information from Liberty German's phone, including the video on the phone taken of the encounter with Bridge Guy. And so he knows exactly what time that was taken. And it was taken beginning at 2:13 and 51 seconds and lasted 43 seconds. And so the reason that is crucial is because if you establish the time that happened, you get a pretty good sense of when the girls' lives were taken. And if you can prove the girls' lives were taken sometime between 2:30 and 3:30, and if Brad Holder has a very good alibi at that time, then that's more reason not to look at him as a viable suspect. So not only did he say, yes, the phone's video was at 2:13, but he even pointed out that this particular phone thanks to Apple Health data, is able to track movement. Now, it doesn't track movement like if you're in a car.
Right.
But if you're walking, it tracks that. And he indicated that this phone was moving until 2:32 p.m. and it did not move after that time.
So it indicated that was where it was found underneath Liberty's shoe, underneath Abigail's body. So once it stops moving, it sounds like...
So the obvious conclusion is that the girls were taken to where they met their tragic end and did not leave that area afterwards. So then there was cross-examination by Jennifer Auger, and she said, well, since it doesn't track movement in cars, isn't it possible that they slipped down to an access road and hopped in a car and maybe went somewhere and then came back later? Was that what she was suggesting?
That was what she was suggesting.
And then she got off on a confusing...
I did not understand this at all.
...about text messages and iMessages, and at some point...
her hypothesis was that, like, essentially the phone had to be turned off for these messages not to be received at a certain time, and then the phone was turned back on at 4:33 a.m., and that means that someone else must have been...
But she expressed that in a very confusing way.
Yeah. She couldn't really...
And McClellan didn't understand what she was trying to get at. The judge didn't understand
Cecil
what she
didn't,
was... Cecil didn't understand. The judge didn't understand. So
she could have had that razzle-dazzle moment where I think a lot of people have been like, whoa, but I think it kind of got lost in some of the questioning. And it was like an agonizingly long amount of time where people were just trying to figure out what was going on, seemingly.
And then Roland Purdy was called to the stand. This is Indiana State Police investigator who at some point indicated that he thought he saw what the defense describes as the mimicked crime scene photo on Brad Holder's Facebook page. He now said that Holder denied being on the Facebook page, and all he is sure of, all Purdy is sure of, is that he saw the image in Holder's file, and he's not sure what the origin was. So that was that testimony.
Yeah, and Baldwin kind of tried to indicate that, like, oh, you must be saying this because it's inconvenient for you to say otherwise, and like, you know, you were put up to it, and I mean, it seemed like a pretty honest mistake to make. You know, you're looking at basically an image of a Facebook post versus looking at it actually on the Facebook, so I can understand why you would make that mistake. That's just my take.
And then the last witness of the day was a man I'd never heard of.
I literally, when they brought up a new name, sometimes I'm like, I mean, in this context, when I'm like sleep deprived and we've been there for hours, I was like, are they just making, like, who is this? But he's actually an incredibly important witness. So
name is Pat Cicero, and he was the prosecution's expert. And it was kind of interesting to see kind of like this mirror image. We saw what the defense thought an expert was, and then we got to see this expert who actually is an expert. He was the chief of detectives at LaPorte County Sheriff's Department for 20 years. He is a certified crime scene investigator. He has been to specialized training and skills in blood splatter patterns. He teaches blood stain analysis. He has testified in 32 criminal cases in a variety of counties.
And he never said stuff like, this proves the Brad Holder didn't do it, or this proves Richard Allen did it. He consistently talked about, this indicates that, this tends to be that. It was like, he's not trying to, it was just like, here's the facts.
And we should caution you that some of this testimony is upsetting because he gets into a description of the last moments of these girls. And it was disturbing to hear, and many people, including you, were tearing up.
Yeah, I was crying. It was like, I'm going to start crying again, I think, talking about it, because I don't know, it's just really bad. So if you want to, I guess, skip ahead a few minutes, that would be fine.
So in February 12th of 2024, Mr. Cicero was asked to examine materials in this case. He received electronic files, post-mortem documents, diagrams, He actually also went to the crime scene and conducted tests there. He examined clothing that was discovered with a person he described as Miss Williams. He studied photos of the blood stains. He indicated that he believes the so-called F symbol on the tree looks like an upside down L. He indicated it was on the northeast side of the tree, and it is a 3 by 7 inches, I believe.
Yeah.
And it was made up of several different blood stains. So he indicated that it's after Liberty German received her first injury, she was still mobile and moving.
Yeah, let me so she was I guess cut on the neck 3 times, but after her first injury she was still moving. And what his hypothesis is based on where the print is is that and they tested it out with someone who's the same size, same height as Liberty, and they think that it was her bloody handprint on the tree, essentially, that she put it with her, I think, pinky up, leaning against the tree.
He indicated
and
that
she it sounds like she, based on where the pools are, the pools of blood, she, like, I guess, staggered a bit, and then I guess like sat down at some point.
And the reason
before she bled out.
The reason her hand was bloody, he indicated that after someone receives a wound of that magnitude and starts bleeding, it's very common for them to put their hand over the wound to try to staunch the bleeding. After Abby received her wound, on the other hand, she did not move again. He indicated that, as we all know, Abby was dressed in Libby's clothes at the time of her injury. There was very heavy blood saturation to those clothes. So people been wondering, was she dressed in those clothes after she was killed or before she was killed? And because of the blood saturation, Mr. Cicero believes that she was wearing those clothes at the time she was killed. He indicated there was a huge amount of blood flowing from down Libby's shoulders and neck. And he also indicated that he believed the sticks that were placed on the body were there to obscure and hide the bodies. And he said, someone from across the creek would have trouble seeing the bodies with the sticks on them. And as Anya mentioned, he showed by the hand with the pinky up, he indicated how that could leave that mark on the tree. And so he said all evidence, in his opinion, indicates that it was not painted on there by someone trying to leave an Odinist symbol or any symbol of that kind. It was just a last sad gesture from Miss German.
I feel so badly for their families having to hear that. And I don't know. I just think about, I mean, they were only like 14 and 13, and like thinking about what they had to have gone through. I don't know. It just really, it just hit me hearing him describe that. And I'm sorry. I'm like, I just.
It's okay.
It's just.
It was very upsetting. We were sitting very near the families, and it was very very upsetting.
This whole thing is just, it's just
and the
a
family
nightmare.
Is going to hear a lot worse at the trial, if there is a trial.
And it's just, I'm just going to make an observation. Richard Allen, when he gets really agitated, it's usually when they're talking about those kids. I'm not even drawing a conclusion for that. It seems to bother him too. It seems to really bother him. He's agitated. He's moving more. He's fidgeting.
when they're talking about Brad Holder and they're talking about Patrick Westphal and all this other stuff that has very little to do with anything as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't seem to bother him as much. And again, I'm not drawing a conclusion based on that, but it's something to note.
And that was basically it. That I do know.
Well, there was an important development.
I was going to say, I do note.
Of course there was,
That at the end of the session, Judge Gull indicated that she was going to vacate the safekeeping order and place Rich Allen back in the custody of the Carroll County Sheriff. And there was one more thing.
Well, that means that he's going to go to Cass County. They're not going to have him in Carroll County. He's going to go to Cass County. So
he's in the custody.
He's in the custody of Carroll County. But I mean, I think we all expected that to happen this time around. So, yeah. I mean, that seemed like it was a well-reasoned argument by Rosie.
Then there was kind of a meeting.
And I want to say he was grinning while he walked out. Or maybe grinning's a strong word. He was smiling. That was the first time I've seen him hold a smile, except towards his family. But I should note this. By the time the blood expert started talking, his family members, Janice Allen, his mother, and his wife, Kathy Allen, had left their seats and did not return. So they missed him being released to Cass County because they seemingly did not want to hear an expert who is going to talk about how these two girls were slaughtered.
And again, Mr. Cicero was a very impressive witness. And then before we conclude, I wanted to mention that at the very end, there was a meeting that looked tense from a distance. It was all of the attorneys gathered at the bench in front of Judge Gull, and they indicated that they would need to arrange a time to meet to discuss the issue they were discussing.
Whatever that was.
Love
to be a fly on that bench, but we don't know. And so, yeah, we'll keep you updated if there's another hearing or if it might just be one of those in chambers things. I don't know. Who knows?
We'll keep an eye.
And just thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for putting up with our late releases. We've been so busy and it's just internet can be a little bit iffy up here. And in addition to that, it's just we're kind of running on empty right now. So we just appreciate you supporting us and sorry for crying there, but I just want to say we really appreciate all of you and all your really kind comments and whatever in our Facebook group and kind emails we've been getting, and it means a lot because this was
rough.
Yeah, this was it's nice to, like I mentioned, we've some nice people who live up here. There's some nice people who go to these things, and it's nice to connect with everybody. But you're never that far away from remembering what it's about, which is just this awful nightmare. And I think it's really important that we honor that and keep it in mind at all times that that's what it is. It's not anything good. It's just something awful.
So thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening. Beat the summertime sluggishness and enhance your everyday with our wonderful sponsor, Via Hemp.
This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies with high-quality hemp grown right here on American farms, all for an excellent value, especially for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
Each of Via's gummies is crafted to give you a specific mood. Get creative, get some rest, get focused, get some pleasure. All with Via's delicious gummies.
No matter what you're looking for, Via has you covered.
Their grapefruit CBG and CBD flow state gummies help me feel energized and focused to get a lot done this summer in terms of scheduling, conducting interviews, running around after sources, and more.
You don't need a medical card to enjoy Via Hemp, and these products ship legally to all 50 states.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use the code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.